Snake and Banter is brought to you by Esports Bet. Perhaps you've heard me mention before, if it's your first time betting with crypto on the site, they previously offered a 100 USDT risk-free bet. So it's called bet forgiveness. You make the bet. If you win, you win. If you lose, you would message the mod mail, say Thorin or Last Free Nation sent you, and you would get back 100 USDT. Well, now they're offering, until a limited time, a certain amount of people, which hasn't been met yet, can get up to 200 USDT. So similar scenario, you make the bet. If you lose, message the mod mail, say Thorin or Last Free Nation sent you, and get up to 200 USDT back. I'll let people know when that's ended. By the way, pro tip, I'd suggest betting on an underdog game. That way you get 2 or 3 times the potential odds. If you win, you make out like a bandit. If you lose, you get the bet back and you can try again, can't you? Right. This is going to be another episode of Snake and Banter with me and Mauisnake here. And our guest for this one is Heccu, who you will have seen. She's a freelance interviewer host in the scene. Obviously, you might have seen some of the content she does for HLTV.org, or maybe you've seen her on the ESL broadcasts or other stuff that some people do or don't watch. I have one question at the outset, though, Heccu, right? Even though I understand, in theory, it's kind of bad form to be like, he didn't really saw that woman in half. That's actually a trick, and her legs were at the bottom, and those were fake legs coming out, because it kind of ruins the magician's trick. I do have a little question for you, right? Because if you do know one thing about me, I'm trying to get over it, but it's taken me a long time. I do really despise how stupid, really stupid people are. I know it's quite petty. I should just ignore it and be above it all. So one thing I just have to ask you is this, Heccu, right? You probably saw the really great response to that hilarious interview that you did with Son Pius when he just joined ENCE. I think you know where I'm going with this. And all those people were like, lol, he thought he was speaking English and he spoke Spanish. Right, here's the problem with that, Heccu. You actually did too good a job selling it. You were too smooth with how you did it, right? It's up to you. You can listen, you can just pretend it was all fake or anything, right? Here's my question for you. Almost certainly you just said before it went live, like, it'd be really funny if we do this, right? Like, I'll say basically in English, like, how are you doing on the team, whatever, and then you just answer in Spanish, just, oh, you don't know it. Like, obviously that is what happened, right? It was just a setup. It was a skit, right?
So basically the night before we had the media day, and by the end of the day, I just like go downstairs and I see Senpais, just like standing and breathing some air. And I was like, hey, I know that you'll be the first one that I'm going to interview tomorrow.
Okay.
Like for the pregame and stuff like that. He was like, oh, okay, what you gonna ask? And I was like, obviously one of the first things I'm gonna ask you is about you now playing an international team, because you were previously playing only in Spanish teams. He was like, okay, but then I'll respond to you in Spanish. I was like, oh yes, do that.
Yeah,
so, like,
there you go.
Then like the next day we have like this situation, like, and I already kind of like forgot. I was like, maybe he'll do it, maybe not, or not. Like, and then like I asked a question, he started responding. I was like, I wonder what I should do in this scenario.
Yeah, there you go.
Should I try to like, oh yes, Senpai has just said blah 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 while not knowing anything, or if he'll say like, oh no, it's just fine, it's joking. Like, and I was like, okay, relieved. I was like trying to figure out like, what do you actually do in this scenario? So like, it was actually funny, like, okay, for both of us, and
it's
I
guess a bit half and half then.
Community. Yeah,
okay, fair enough. Because the thing with that is, like, the reason I bring it up is there was a famous incident like that in the past that I can't believe how dumb fans are, where basically, if you remember, it's the one where Frankie got in trouble because she ate that piece of pizza from a fan in, like, the audience, right? Even though, again, in what universe a fan really believes that Frankie would just be like, oh, they'll start eating your food live. Okay, you can't do anything about it on camera. Like, it goes out saying, she obviously asked that guy before, like, look, it'd be really funny if at the end I'll take the pizza. Like, can I just take this bit? And he, by the way, the fan, I've no doubt, was like, yeah, go ahead, do it. But all the fans on the internet were like, oh, she's so entitled. It's like, what? It was obviously a joke in it, and it was funny. So I just thought it was the same thing, because like I said, believe it or not, it actually might have looked more plausible to maybe someone in the industry if you'd have just like had no reaction, but you did a really good reaction. You were sort of like, what the hell, what's going on? But you acted it too well. That's the problem. You were too smooth with it. So sorry, I just want to clear that up and just also let people know, guess what? This is show business, guys. Not everything on camera is genuine, kind of like Fallen. That was just a needless shot there. You're not associated with that in any way. I'm sure you like Fallen. Maui likes Fallen. That was just a needless shot across the bow from me, a slightly jaded old man who... I could also make another joke about Fallen there. So whatever, we'll just get into the episode up. We'll just start the episode. It's just before it goes off the reservation.
My co-host's opinions do not reflect my own.
No, exactly. That's one of the reasons why I'm making the And you're like trying to come in the wake of that. So, just something to be said about that. Yeah, indeed. Right. So what we'll do is this, as always, obviously, we always go the good, bad and ugly is the format. We always let the guests start it all off. So what is your good point for this one, Heccu?
My good point for this one is that, so like, you have like different kind of organizations and organizers like trying to, come up with something new that can help the scene. And what I picked as like the good thing is the Academy League that like was kind of introduced like relatively not so long ago, like a bit more.
Wasn't it like last year or something?
Yeah, like exactly, just like a bit more than like a year ago. Because, for example, before like how like players could get into teams, if like it's like unknown players, they'll be like maybe getting picked up from FPL, which I think is a great tool to check out the players, like if they're like good mechanically, if like they, like if they're puggers. But that's the problem. Like, yeah, you can get like a ropes, you can get a spinks, but not all of them will actually be good teammates, because maybe they are puggers, but they don't provide enough information during the game. They don't really talk, which is enough for FPL, but not enough to play in an actual team. Or maybe they do talk, and sometimes they talk too much, like, and they're toxic, and it's impossible for them to exist in the same environment. So I feel like this is like kind of like we were kind of like lacking some kind of platform where we can not only see the skill of the players, but also find out like how they are as teammates. Because like if they don't work out like in an academy team, like probably they'll not work out like with someone like in a higher tier team where there's even like more egos possibly. And also you can check out how do the players react like once they get spotlight, right? Will they actually use it? Because you have like a lot of players who's like, yeah, like when I'm gonna be big, I will post things on Twitter, I'll do content and stuff like that, but I will not do it right now because it's cringe and blah blah blah, right? Like there's like this, and like it always triggers me. Like why do you think like we should care for you right now if you don't want to work for your like name, for your future and stuff like that? So this way big organizations like teams can like check out like, hey, okay, like he's like actually committed, and he's not just posting things like won today 2-1 against this team, lost today, bad performance. Because otherwise we don't actually get to know the person, we don't get to know your character. And like when you are a professional player, that's like another thing that teams look at. They don't want you to be just good at things. They want you kind of be like this, like, because in a way you kind of like you are a product, and like if you are more relatable, if you have a character, and it's way easier for the organizations like to get interested in you. Plus they also can check out that like once there is a spotlight, how will you act? Because there were some players in the Academy League, like they got the spotlight and all of a sudden like they were like writing like the R word. They're kind of like, oh, I played so bad, blah blah blah, and you're like, don't do this. Like you are showing that like you should not get picked up by like a good team, because you'll keep on writing this and they'll be like too afraid like to have you. But yeah, and overall like we can see that like right now like there's like a lot of like success stories. Like I mean, Maus that is going to play at the major is basically Maus and XT with two exceptions, because even the coach and the players are from that roster. Then we have different names that like got picked up already like into like other teams. For example, like Drop, who is right now in Fury, he's been playing now for like some time. Like in the beginning, he was actually playing this WePlay Academy League. Also, the same goes for Big, right? Like Crimbo, Sin, like all of those guys like were in the WePlay Academy League. So like I feel like this like a great platform that is giving a lot of things to the players, to the potential organizations, and to us as the viewers.
Well, we've talked about the Academy League briefly before on this, and I guess to say, well, I mean, one person you missed was Monasi. I mean, I think that's
it's just because she was going through people who qualify for the major, so it was a bit awkward. I could tell already. She was like, that was like the elephant in the room, wasn't it? Like, he's really good. Let's be real. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, so yeah, giving them
obviously Monasi. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, a platform to play on, because we see or hear about a lot of tier 2, tier 3 talent that are coming up in the space, and everybody was murmuring about Monasi, but I frankly hadn't seen him before WePlay Academy League, or really doing the research to actually do a WePlay Academy League season. So I I didn't really know what was coming. I don't think many people knew what was coming, but then you watch it because it does have better viewership than, or at least retention, I would say, than the average random tier 3 cup, where people also don't really know what's going on in that. It feels like a more legitimate product. And sometimes with those cups, just to be frank about them, you don't really know what's going on behind the scenes with those. Like sometimes they feel a little bit suspect in terms of the results. Like you'd see like really like tier 1 teams that should be beating people just getting owned, but the Academy League one kind of felt like everybody was on very similar footing because, well, one, sometimes they're playing at home, but two, they actually have to play in person for the playoffs. And when you see them deliver the playoffs in the arena, it felt like it legitimized a lot of what they were doing online, even though it didn't have the same effect as LAN pressure. It sort of emulates that, and I think when people were able to kind of get over those first nerves, because I even think in the first time Mauisnake played in the WePlay playoffs, he actually didn't do very well in the first game he played, but then in the second game he just dominated again. So you got to see those jitters go away from him. So yeah, it's a cool product. I think that any kind of developmental league, like just to relate it back to regular sport, like the AAA for MLB or like the G League and the NBA, all of those are not necessarily profitable products, but I think that they're actually very important in the space just to nurture talent.
One thing actually, I think off the top of my head, this was actually wasn't it the case when they ran it last year that part of it ran during the player break as well, the pro player break?
Yes.
Because I can't remember, was that intentional that they did it that way, or was that just like happenstance of the scheduling? Do you know?
Probably most likely if I had to guess, probably they did like on purpose, because during that time, that's like when there's no like high quality productions. Like, yeah, you have like those like, as I like, like Pinnacle Cups and stuff like that. Like
sure.
They're good, but the content that like WePlay actually produce, like the quality of like all of the videos, and like when it comes like to the casters, like you have like Launders and Scrawny, or you have like Harry and Hugo, like the analysts. I mean, this guy is like sitting right here for so yeah, it's just like they gave like a good visual product, and also they got a lot of attention through talent that they hired. So there was just so many people watching it.
Because I actually thought if that was intentional or not, that's actually, I think, also a really good application of that. Because another thing is, normally, even if you'd run an Academy League in the past, like, no one would watch it. Because back then, even dream hacks were like 10 a penny. There was like a million lands that you could watch. And so the premise really was, to actually get on the radar, you actually had to place, like, I would say, like, probably like top 4 in a dream hack open LAN. Which at that point in time, by the way, you're not even playing against people of your peers. You're playing against, like, some IGL that's coming down with, like, a couple of players that used to be, like, top tier 1 pros, and you're just getting beaten by them. And then when people see the result and go, oh, did well in the game, who gives a fuck, whatever, they were just probably not even trying, those good guys, and they beat them anyway. So actually having it in that window when there was no other CS to watch, basically, and this was also last year, so we didn't have all the LAN circuit back. I think that actually is why also they got a lot of eyeballs on it initially. Because when I heard this idea that they were going to make an Academy League, I was like, that's a good idea in terms of the raw, like, Academy concept, like, have a few years of, like, trying people out at LANs, like, test them. But I never thought it'd actually bring, like, talent straight to tier 1, and you'd go from the Academy League into, like, a tier 1 team. Because at the time, the perception was, I'd even use these heroic guys, you wouldn't join Astralis talent and think you're going to get into Astralis. You'd go, oh, I have to go and join, like, another Danish team, beat Astralis, and then maybe then I could get into Astralis or heroic. That was the logic before, and that's how you get more eyeballs. You do play in the online cops that you're talking about. By the way, as an aside, even though I do hate online play and think it is massively more variable and randomized, etc., I also am really, really suspicious of those tournaments, by the way, where what they do is if you're the tier 1 team, you drop in for the quarters onwards, and the amount of times the fucking tier 1 baller LAN team just straight up gets smashed by a nobody in the quarters or the semis of a cop where it's not even that much prize money. Like, I'm sorry, that is just the most wide open angle to match fix you will ever see in your fucking career. And because it's online play and you don't know the opponent, no one will ever even question it. They'll just go, whatever, online results, bloody BS, isn't it? And even I'll be on the show like, who cares about those cups? They lost. So I will say, I've also questioned the authenticity of some of those results. That's why in the Academy League as well, there's no real benefit to do that. You are only there to show off your skills, how good these players are. In fact, quite frankly, if people don't know, it's not like the Na'Vi team were godlike. They had Mauisnake, that was it. It's actually the case that, like, in that league, it wasn't even that your team has to be the best and win completely all the time. Like, it was just about showing off the talents. And then, yeah, the sheer amount that have gone to tier 1 now is ridiculous. And I even agree with the other point as well. The main problem they had, I actually think NA players, it seems, had this the whole time, is that there are no such roles as people. Like, the joke is, if people don't know, when everyone knows, like, complexity are good, it's like, right, complexity is taking players like Floppy, who were trying to be like fucking NiKo, and then just gone, right, well, we've got enough players like that, so you just do another role then, homie. And he's like, I guess I'll start learning that. Like, you'll never get like the fucking Crimsons at Knicks in those scenes. It'll never happen. Whereas, and I think the JDC guy's the guy from Mouse who fucking typifies that. Like, yeah, you wouldn't, Torsey guy would have made it if he'd have been really good online. I think obviously Zershin, if he keeps going, he clearly had some skills. I think the JDC guy would have just never made it, mate. He would have just, he'd have been that guy who'd be like sprouting alternate attacks, and then they would just keep leaving him the whole time to go to Big and Mouse, and he would just sit there forever like, when do I ever get a break? What is this? So I do think you also get to see like the team structure, and they're coached by real coaches now as well. That's another massive factor. If you're in a tier 3 team in an online cup, you might be coached by nobody, just by a manager guy. Even might not even have a coach, by the way. Whereas in these teams, you saw, there's another thing the orgs did once it was a real league. They actually invested and put like real coaches in there. Some of the coaches in those leagues are like really famous former pros, or people who, here's another thing for coaches, who were trying to like sort of earn their way up in the coaching world, and they used to be a pro, and one day you might get to, this happened, you might get to coach Astralis or Mouse Sport, like, well, it's got Mouse now, technically, I know they've rebranded or whatever. So in theory, like, there's actually opportunities for everyone, and then also you can throw in, they haven't done it yet, like, obviously at that time period, that's actually the one downside, Heccu. It was good that it got people to watch because they recognised all that talent, but it wasn't a very good actual, like, pathway for talent at the time, aside from you, because unfortunately at the time, all of these guys hadn't done any lands in ages, so they were like, yes, I will take the money, thank you. Like, I also hope in the future, that's what we can do with the younger analysts. So in the same way as, like I say, for the dream hacks of the world, that's how they made it through in the past. Leagues like that's also how you'll get built up, and you'll get your experience online, and you'll get the chance in front of the camera and stuff. I mean, technically you came from that league, right? Isn't that one of the first places that made you known?
Yeah, because that was like my basically first international experience in CSGO.
There you go. Exactly. Oh, and then you can be the Monacy of WePlay Academy talent then. Except, obviously, you're going to the major. Whatever. It's had to throw the shot across the bow again. I know, I throw shots at the old guys, at the young guys. In between, I'm not ageist like that. So here's the point, right? Let's go to the other one now, Mauisnake. What is your good point? This is, by the way, another completely on-brand Mauisnake take. Come on, hit me with it. Come on. What would you take as good? The whole RMR, all those teams, got all the teams from the Americas, APAC region, all of Europe. We had so many teams in Europe, underdogs coming through. Nobody's coming through. We had legends coming back. Because come on, what is Mauisnake? Let's think about what range Maui would go for his good point. What are you going to hit me with? What was your good point?
I mean, it's obviously fitting given the fact that I was working the Americas RMR, but I just think that it's nice to see that Liquid has secured the legend spot and that they're continuing the form that they've had for basically since Cologne now, because I would say that, they probably had a pretty heavy honeymoon when they brought in Yukindar for Cologne. They were all trying really hard. They talked about how everyone was playing 140 plus hours in the past 2 weeks at that event. And then to actually see that they did very well at ESL Pro League, and they did, I guess they dropped one map in all of the RMR to Complexity because Floppy dropped like 38 kills or something like that. Yeah, that felt a little bit excusable, but just the fact that they're now a consistent team, and I don't know, I'm curious what you would say, Thorin, on this, but I would put them in my elite category now. I think that they're one of the top teams in the space, and when I say elite, I don't know, they're a team that basically can make grand finals appearances, as they just did, whether that means that they have a true chance of winning it. I mean, they were a round away, they were a map away in those grand finals, so they were darn close to doing it. So yeah, I would consider them in my elite category now, just given the consistency that they've shown over the past 3 events.
I'll get to that. What do you think, Heccu? What do you think of Liquid qualifying and how they are as a team in general?
I kind of feel like Yukindar is the type of person that they needed, because I think they were trying to find this in Shocks, right? Because I remember during EPL, when he was playing with them, he was really vocal, and he would be the one hyping up whenever there would be, let's say, I know, 10-5 or 11-4. They would be like, okay, guys, it's all good, we're turning around, it's fine. But I feel like what Shocks was lacking was the actual firepower with which he could be able to encourage the team, and that's what Yukindar kind of has. When you actually have this guy who is maybe encouraging the whole team, but is also showing good numbers, it kind of makes you believe more in yourself.
Right, okay, here's the answer, Mauisnake. The problem I have is this. Normally, I do like elite is like roughly like 4 to 5 teams, but I do say it does vary because I also think it has to be like an eye test thing. So the problem right now is this: technically, they have to be considered elite because even the teams I have above them, like FaZe and Na'Vi, have had rough times and moments where they didn't look that good. So if I'm saying they're not elite, then nobody is elite by that logic. I mean, technically, yes, FaZe Club would still be from the past tournaments and stuff, but Na'Vi's looked a bit ropey the last few anyway. So I guess by that logic, I would put them in there. But if you talk about the traditional, which, as you said, is more like you're going to win titles, you should be in with a chance to win almost every tournament. I feel like they're more on the border of that. Like, I actually think that, funnily enough, them, G2 and Vitality were in the same triangle. It's just that at the moment Vitality's taken the slight step up and looks like they're heading more towards the elite category. And obviously they have won a tournament now. So I'd say it's just a bit tenuous at the moment. Like, the weird thing now is the top 10's really good, like 1 to 10, but then the top parts, if anything, got a little bit weaker. So I think maybe the major will resolve that anyway. We'll see soon. So I would say the Liquid angle, that's why I made the joke of like Liquid qualifiers. It's like, mate, where are these expectations? A minute ago, you were like, the win Pro League, and they made the major from the Americas RMR. It's like, everyone made it from the Americas RMR, mate. Like, who the fuck didn't? That's the question, right? It's mental. So I would say I don't give a fuck about complexity though, so I don't particularly care about like the idea they qualified from there. And also the Legends spot, I agree. Look, it's good that they got the Legends spot because it means they're guaranteed to be in the top 16 and we don't ever have to worry about any shenanigans of them getting some rough seeding or some BS where you first do BO1s, you just play teams that are too good. You don't have to worry about that. So that is good, I guess, objectively. It's just, again, if the scene was perfect, they would do that anyway. Because as you say, if they're like the 4th or 5th best team, then they'd just be in there anyway, wouldn't they? It would be a waltz to do that. So, and then in terms of how they look as a team overall, the problem is when you say solid, then you go and say that they're elite. It's like, well, which are they? Are they solid? Are they really elite? Okay. Are they really amazing? So like, give me on that angle, because that's the problem. Is one of those is like, it's pretty good, it's going well, or one's like it's looking awesome, like don't even need to change much. Let's just win those championships, right? So which end are we on that?
Well, off of the most recent form, I would consider them A+ tier, but not S tier. But I would still consider both of those in elite if I had to make a broader term.
Yeah, okay.
So S and A+ is elite to me, and I think the teams that occupy that are just FaZe, Na'Vi, Vitality, and Liquid. That's probably it. I don't think there's anybody else that's in that for me. So yeah, they think they're the 4th best of those 4 teams, but they're still in the category.
Okay. Because that's the thing, I'm also more around that level. Like, the issue I have is this. It's like, because it's still only a couple of lands, I still think it's too small a sample size to, like, know. Like, I think you probably need the major, and then you'll know after that tournament where they're actually at. Because the problem is, like, I actually think, if anything, Yekindar probably overperformed at times at Pro League, and so did OC, but then Elise underperformed, so you're trying to figure out, like do the equation of that. So, the one thing I will say is the issue, I think, for them as a team is they absolutely have to get it so that Elise is the best player of that team. If he's the best player of that team, then we're cooking with gas. You can do all sorts of things. The OC question isn't even a problem at that point in time. Because if he isn't, if it's actually Yekindar as the best player, like, the problem is, it's just not the role where you can carry every single game like Ziwu and Simple and Theory, NiKo do, etc. Like, and even those guys, you'll notice, have like another potential top 10 player next to them. So I think you need those two to be really good. After that, the rest of them can fill out the squad. Naf doesn't even need to be a superstar anymore. Nitro can do a decent job. Actually seems like he's half decent again. I do notice he gets no credit because everyone's like now trying to pretend like Yekindar comes up with the strats, calls the strats, is the coach, taught Elise how to play accounts. Like, oh, don't worry, you can tell I'm sort of working on it. There'll be a video coming, don't worry about that. So that whole narrative is absolute bonker, but whatever.
Well, when you listen to the Nitro's calm videos, Yekindar is just talking way more than Nitro, which is concerning.
Is he entry?
Yeah. I mean, he's putting together a lot of mid-round plans too on top of that. But I assume that it's
so. Here's the problem with that. Here's how this works. Here's how accountability works at Mauisnake. You know when he does that, and then he gets a fucking amazing entry and 2Ks people in the head, and then they win the round off of it. Well, you know all those rounds in that Pro League fella where he couldn't do that, and he couldn't get an entry, and he was just sat back and he was doing nothing. That means he gets the blame for that. Not the IGL. Remember, if we're going off the IGL, it's all about the chess master uses the pieces. So the problem is it's got to go on both sides. It can't only be the credit here and then what's Nitro doing elsewhere? It's like, well, which is it? Is it Nitro? Is it Yekindar? Who was it?
Right. Well, I think that the thing is that video that he posted purposely isn't showing freeze time calls. They're not showing. Yeah. So I think that's where Nitro, I would have to strongly assume he's the one that's saying this is what we're going to be doing this round, and this is why we're doing it. So,
I mean, spoiler.
Building foundation.
If that's not the case, then okay, no problem. Get your Nitro the fuck out of there. So again, that's problem. True. Again, someone's got to be doing something. So right, let's go then. So for this one, for my good point, mine's also entirely on brand, but basically, I know people are a bit depressed with the story. You're like, Device is going to leave NIP. I mean, whether he is or not, he's never played for NIP again. Like I told you, don't worry about that. So it's irrelevant to the NIP story. But obviously, the bummer has been like, I know some people hated on the S-Attack, but I thought S-Attack would eventually get figured out and he'd be able to do a fill role, basically, which it seems like he does in the team. Sure, that whole like res AWPing angle, that can't last forever. Like maybe it can work temporarily. It can't be a long-term solution. But you just see the Alexi B edition. Nip's future actually looks good, mate. If you think about what they were actually doing when they didn't even have Alexi B, already it looks way better when he came in. They've already claimed like a scalp. Like obviously some people might even debate maybe Cloud9 should have been in that group earlier of the elite ones. That's why I also think once you get past position like 3 on the world, it's a bit open for 4, 5, 6 in my opinion. So I think just Nip's future in general looks really good, especially because I think the part that's the most underrated about that move, no one seems to be putting this together. It's why, if you remember, I refused to ever bail on the idea G2 and Vitality would get their lineups together because they committed to going international with really good international players. What that means is unless you abandon the whole project and toss all that money that you spent in the bin, you just keep changing a player until it works eventually. It's not like when you're trapped in a scene like the Swedish scene and you have to go, right, which of these 3 players that no one knows or cares about are we using as the 5th player next? Is it your Chiquinho or is it fucking like all those players from the account? You don't have to keep doing that. Now you can just keep going until you get the right player. So even if you don't think this lineup is the one that makes it with Alexi B, now that they're speaking English and they are committed to speaking English and they're not going to be speaking Swedish, then they will just get the right players eventually. And I already think this core looks half decent. They look like a sleeper to be like a top 8 team. Maybe have like a crazy quarterfinal, it could go semis. They could be like the Ents of this major, I think. What are your guys' thoughts?
I'd say, because you were saying like about like the maybe like eventually like we'll change Res from an open position, like maybe, I don't know, either bring in like a new opera or put him like back, I don't know. But the impression that I got, for example, like from DGL, their coach, is that he really believes like that Res can be like a really good opera, like a really like a remarkable opera, you know, like those kind of operas that like kind of decide the outcome like of everything. So it will be interesting how actually good he will be able, and if he'll do like all of those things. But right now they really believe in this project. I just like find it a little bit ironic because like I mean, I guess the reason like why Braun actually left Fnatic was not just because of them like going international, but also like because he didn't want to play for with specific people. But the initial narrative that like I was given was like, hey, yeah, Braun wanted to play in an all Swedish team. He goes to NIP, he gets the all Swedish team, and now he goes international again. So I was like, wait, what? How does this work? And then people tell me like, oh yeah, actually, besides the all Swedish thing, there were like some problems with that. I was like, oh, okay, now it makes sense. But just like in the beginning, I was really confused.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
When they made this announcement, I was like, why? But now it makes a bit more sense.
I mean, to be fair, if people don't know Swedes as a culture, they are fairly like non-confrontational. They are conflict averse. Like even in teams, if people don't know, they're the ultimate region where you do just wake up to like a message on Discord, like, well, I was kicked from the team, and no one said anything. Like they're notorious for that, mate. So I have to say that whole narrative of like, oh, I just wanted to play with like Swedish speaking people. That's a better way than saying like, let me see. I've written my notes down here. Fuck Smooyas. Like if he does that, that's just drama, isn't it? Like he's already left the team anyway. In that scenario, I feel like that's a mixture of like, there's another thing players do. You just come up with a story that makes it sound better as to why you did so. Maybe it's not the real reason why, and then also it's just politically better in it. And in that scenario, it was a pretty good like alibi because you never thought like tomorrow, like, and they're stopping speaking Swedish in NIP. So you think you get away with it as well, wouldn't you? Like, you don't know they're just going to drop you right in it. Because, by the way, that's also what NIP and Astralis, because they're obviously orgs where sometimes the players don't quite know what page the org management's on. They're the ultimate orgs for the players wrecking themselves or the management accidentally in interviews by saying stuff they don't realise. Like, obviously, the classic one was like when they said the same thing. Like, Hampus was like, I think, actually, this is the 5-man lineup I like. Dude, I bet the management was like, we're trying to fucking sell him, you idiot. People have to believe he could come back if they know we're not going to use it. You know what I mean? Like, that's one of those ones where I guarantee someone just told him, like, yeah, just don't comment on the lineup at all anymore, actually. Just no comment on that topic. Like, this is the way it is in interviews.
Yeah, I wonder how like coordinated is, for example, like Navi as a team and Navi as an organization. Because remember, like, Blade giving an interview like, hey, Hetrick is not yet ready for tier 1, and afterwards they're like, hey, we're selling Hetrick. Yeah. It's like this like combination, just like it's like the worst timing pause like that you could actually get. I was like,
I also appreciate, by the way, the full spectrum approach where everyone in Na'Vi has to keep telling me, Mauisnake, that they're really practicing Vertigo, and then they veto it every single fucking time ever in the history of the world. Well, what's the point of that then? Like I don't even, like, I at least would understand if they were like floating it. It was like a challenge to make the other person pick. Like, what? It's not even. Like, can I please see it then? Why do you have to keep telling me that? It's so bad. It's so bad. I don't know what the strategy is there. It's some like 500 IQ shit, mate. I don't know.
It's eventually it'll come out, but
but at that point, like, come on, man.
We have no idea when that's going to be. Yeah, I would say for NIP, of what I was able to see of them, I guess people have kind of talked about the idea that you can't really be a top tier team without a top tier opper, and I wouldn't say that Rez is there yet, but I actually think that his skills, from what I caught, were passable. He seems like he didn't always use the op. Like, I think he's opping much less than other primary oppers are. Like, he's still doing a lot of rifle work, but he's finding a good balance between it. And I almost kind of feel like this is like a weird comparison, but kind of like this is a very poor man Liquid Grand Slam type of thing, where Nitro was the opper for that team, but they didn't really win with opping prowess too much, other than on very specific maps like Overpass, where Nitro was really good at opping A, for example. You don't have to, and I don't think that Vertigo, as much nowadays, people have to op. Actually, like, ZywOo doesn't really op that much on that map anymore, and they still are very, like, they're still very good at it, Vitality, that is. So I guess in terms of where I think the ceiling is for this team, I think that they could probably move up a couple slots. They could probably be a top 7 team, but I don't really see them getting too close to being like top 4 or anything like that. I would be shocked if they do that at the major, actually. But I think that one thing that's been very cool about this is like the resurgence of Hampus as an individual player, now that he doesn't have to call, and that it does seem like they're probably working with his ideas and then the AlexiP overall game plan, because it was obviously a struggle for NIP prior to DJL's inclusion to put together what Hampus wants to do in a round with his own play, and then how to actually construct a winning round based off of his opener, because they clearly just were very disconnected last year. And so if they now have AlexiB helping with that, and DJL, and then Hampus is talking about his openers to them on top of that, I think that they can actually stage a whole round in terms of Hampus does what he wants, or Brolin does what he wants at the beginning, and then they still have a game plan or a mid round that'll probably work out. So I guess I kind of like this move a little bit, but the only team that I really thought was notable that they beat was Cloud9, and I don't know, Cloud9 sometimes just seem like they can lose to anybody too.
The other thing as well is this. The other reason why the Hampus move had to change is because it's one of the things I noticed years ago about Happy before it all went bad, actually, results-wise for him. It's like, mate, essentially, here's the problem with the whole Happy, like, LDLC envious thing. I just think that what happened was he had players like Shocks, like Kenny S. These already are stars who were like, they do what they want, basically. And then he also had NBK, who's like famously good on comms, knowing like team structure and stuff. So the problem is, I don't actually believe he was like masterminding the whole thing. And then the people will even know it was fairly simplistic tactics. It was like a death ball. It was like swap the sites and then I go in and fake or whatever. But if you're actually like a pure lurker, so your whole game is around playing around the spaces and getting in behind people and timing attack. Like, not only are you thinking about that, but you by definition cannot be leading the team. You're not even seeing what they're seeing. You're not even on the same part of the map as them. You're just hoping that when you say like go in now, they go in the right way that you planned in practice. Like, you can't really do that. It's the reason why almost every good IGL is part of the entry pack, or at a minimum you're like in the middle of it, or like just behind the, like, there's nobody sits on the other side of the map like Blame F did, like fucking this guy did. Like, I just don't think you can do that. So to me, it was always obvious, like, you're going to unleash this guy when you actually take him off doing that. Because the difference is, as you've seen from Blame F and Hampus, they're fucking really good players when you take them off IGL. Like, they don't lose a step. You just gain in the team. Whereas actually, that is how you knew when Happy had sort of gone like a bit evil. When his game just dropped off when he stopped being the IGL, that meant like actually he was sort of using people to bait and get kills, you know. He wasn't doing some sort of like fucking dynamic that helped the squad. So yeah, this guy, I think the real reason I'm so in on the AlexiB move is because I think everyone hates on him, not even for the G2 one, just for that OG one, bizarrely. Everyone talks like, what, you only got them to top 6? Like, look at the lineup of that team now. Where are those guys, mate? You know what I mean? Like, who was he working with? So the difference is, people will look at this team, and on paper, it isn't like a G2 team. It's not like a team where every player is supposed to be mega. But AlexiB doesn't need that. Like, look at his career, mate. He's already got Brolan and Hampus now, and then Rez is going to be half decent. Like, mate, that's all he needs. Have you ever seen Ents? Have you ever seen OG? Like, this guy makes miracles work. So I think it's going to be banging, personally. Right, Heccu, now is your chance to potentially get in trouble or win people's respect, because now we're doing the bad part. And this is the part where, in theory, you could be flaming people. This could be like, so what angle have you gone with? What's your bad point?
So my bad point is kind of related to my good point, because like in the good point I said like, hey, you have like an Academy League that is helping like to build like this kind of niche that was kind of like not really used, like, and the bad thing is, the reason like I'm saying bad, it's not because I think it's a bad tournament, bad organizers and stuff like that. It's because I was expecting something else. Like to me it feels like I was like they were selling me like a different thing, but it ended up being the same thing. What I'm talking about is the CCT. It's like the Champion of Champions store. And give me a sec, I'll tell you. Like, so from the like the media release and stuff like that, they said like the organizers have teamed up with several regional operators in a mission to provide an opportunity for emerging regional esports talent and enable sustainable growth of the scene and support the professionalism of our industry as a whole. I was like, amazing. I am a part of a tiny little region that like at the moment kind of like maybe slowed down the development, because previously we had like the Baltic Esports League, which would run like stuff all the time. And then with the finals on the LAN, we used to have LANs like Go Exanimo LANs where Latvians, Estonians, and Lithuanians would often get their first HLTV games. And that would be kind of like the best way like to, get your foot in like into the scene. And he was like, okay, we don't have all of the things that I just mentioned, like, but now we'll have an opportunity, right? And like they divided their tournaments into different regions. I mean, there's like the American one, but in Europe they have like the North one, the East one, the Central one,
South one or whatever.
There's like multiple of them, right? And I was like, okay, where are the Baltic states? I was like, probably they're put it like into the Eastern Europe. I was like, no, the Eastern Europe. I was like, are we in North? Then I check it out. We're not. Did they forget about us? Because that all happens like real often. And then I find ourselves like in Central Europe. I was like, we were never called Central Europe, but I'm gonna take this. Oh, good. Like, and then like the first Central European like open qualifier happened. So I was like, okay, I can see like different teams like from Latvia, Estonia, also like from Poland, Hungary, like all of those countries that are listed as Central Europe. I was like, amazing, good. But then eventually they start inviting teams for the later stages from other countries, and I was like, wait, what? So for example, if we're talking about like
I've just looked, MIBR was in one of them for Central Europe.
That's what I'm so like okay. right now like the list of like what they mentioned as like Central European countries, they're like Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Slovenia, Hungary, Romania, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, right? So like those are the teams that can participate in open qualifier. If we're looking into already like the closed qualifier, right? So like those teams that came from the open qualifier, 4 of them like all fit that. Then they invite 8 teams that fit like this description, but also they add OG Academy, Titans, Eternal Fire Academy, and Young Ninjas, which are like either like South Europe, like they should be like in the South Europe region, like the North Europe region. And I'm like, wait, what? I had like an impression that this is supposed to be like not another like Pinnacle Cup. It's supposed like to not be like another 9 to 5. And it's like this is gonna be like first like we're all gonna be like competing against each other, and then go to a big LAN where it's like, okay, from Central Europe, from North Europe, and stuff like that, because so it starts with open qualifier and then close qualifier. Then they have the Swiss bracket where again 4 teams from the close qualifier, and then they invite 12 more teams. And in the Swiss qualifier, in the second one, they added 8 teams that don't fit this description. So I'm like, and the same happens in playoffs. Again, they add teams. They added like 9Z. They added like Aurora and Tropic, 4's Finest. And then like you look at, I'm sorry if I'm like too emotional, because like I was like, to me it felt like I was being presented like with one thing, and then I get like something that like I've been getting all this time. And I always like watch those like Pinnacle Cups, as I mentioned, like Snow Sweet Snow. Like I watch them because I am interested like in upcoming talents, in upcoming teams. That's my bread and butter. That's exactly like, how like I got into the scene, and I still like enjoy following that. But if I'm opening the list of the teams that have like the highest amount of points in like the region that is kind of like my region, and I see like, okay, number 1 right now is Force, number 2 right now is MIBR, and number 3 right now is 1 win. You know, like it's the best. I mean, I don't know if you like weird analogies.
Come on.
The best way I can
Some would say I
explain
built a
this,
whole career of it, but keep going.
the best way, imagine you like like bread toast, like just a simple thing. You like it, you enjoy it, you eat it all the time. It's amazing. And then all of a sudden someone comes over and tells you like, I know you like bread toast and you also like French cuisine. So how about you try out croton? And you're like, ooh, that sounds fancy. That sounds like so interesting. Like I would want to. Yes, I like French toast. I like. I mean, not like. I want to not say French toast. I like this like toast bread, like French cuisine. Amazing. So they bring you out like this big plate. They open and you see like another toasted bread, and you're like, I love this, but all of this made me feel as if this will be something special, and ends up not being something special, and it makes me like not like that I don't need to like now talk about it, because if it was like what I would expected it to be, I'll be like, everybody, I don't care what you do. Right now, we're watching this. We're supporting this. This is the only way for like our region to grow, to develop, and things like that. But if I'm just getting the same thing, I'll keep on watching it. I'll keep on consuming it. I'll keep on eating this bread, but I'll not be motivated to like promote it, to be like, look, this is something new. This is something great. Because even if you open like HLTV, today, for example, Havo have 2 games in this like CCT. They have one in the South European Series 1 and one in the North European Series 1. And I'm like, you know, it doesn't align with what I was expecting. It just, for me, I'm not saying it's a bad tournament. I'm just saying that what I was told, or at least like what I read, is not what I expected to get.
Oh, one thing I actually had as a quick follow-up on that topic, though, Heccu, is this, because I think this part got lost, or maybe you just weren't explicit with it. Do you actually think it's that they tried to play both sides of the equation? Like, they build it as something fresh and new, like you said, like almost like an Academy League of like a special thing, but it's just only to develop talent in this region, in separate regions, and almost it was implied, like you said, by separating them, like, you know, your region would get a chance to actually show that you're good. You wouldn't just lose to like MIBR in the quarterfinals and then never get to go to the end of the tournament. But then that they like at the whole time planned to do this anyway, and they just wanted like both sets of PR. Like they wanted to have the big teams to get the viewership, but also the PR that do something unique. Or do you think it's more like they started with the idea that it would be regional, and then maybe they just got tempted, as in they realized like, oh wait, actually these teams are available to play. Like maybe MIBR would want to play, and it's like they then drop them in like Snow Sweet Snow Star later in the tournament. Which are you leaning more towards on that?
Since I don't know the organizers, so I know I cannot tell like, hey, if they're like those like slimy people that are just trying to like sit like on both chairs at the same time, or if they're like actually just like once if you start like rolling, they realize like, hey, maybe something should not be done like this, it should be done like this. Honestly, I cannot tell you how exactly it is, just because I don't know them personally. I mean, I guess they like started inviting them because they'll be this way, like they will have more known names, so this way they can get more viewers. Maybe they face like a moment like that, like they're like, hey, who can we actually invite? So I would say like, most of the teams that do get invited, like from the smaller ones, they get invited into the close qualifier. But yeah, just big, relatively big names. I'm not saying like, you know, like FaZe. I'm not talking about like Navi and stuff, like big names of tier 2 and stuff like that. It already gets invited, and then yeah, you see like the situation where like Force has like the most amount of points, BR has the most. Because the reason why these points are important is because depending on who gathered like the most amount of points, I want to say like top 3 gets to go to like a studio LAN and stuff like that.
All
so
right, that is very significant then, yeah.
So it is like really important, because otherwise you might end up having like, okay, so we have Force, MIBR, 1 win from Central Europe, then something blah 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 like from, you know, just like things like this. It's just confusing, because yeah, it's just they're playing this, and depending on where they finish, they get points. So because there's, I feel like first there'll be studio LANs, as I understood, and afterwards there's gonna be like the big one, depending like what exactly happened in the studio one.
Fair
so
enough.
It just, yeah, cannot tell like what was like what happened, why it changed, at least from like what I expected, but it is what it is.
What's your take on this, Mauisnake?
This kind of the CCT tour, I guess that's redundant when I say that. It was I mean I remember a lot of the HLTV articles when they were coming out, and it seemed like it was going to be some new just TO in the space that was actually going to attempt to contest some of the bigger ones out there, because the way that they actually seemed to structure it, it almost kind of felt like Blast-ish, where it would have seasons, regional seasons that would all feed into bigger and less regional tournaments, I would suppose, more general ones like a European one or American one. And they were putting a lot of money into the prize pool. So for it to kind of been playing out the way that it has, it is rather disappointing, because it does read to me very frequently when I see it on the HLTV sidebar or I tune in to just be any other cup that is online. Like this could easily have just been the Betway Cup, and I would have just had the same reception to it. It doesn't really seem like it's necessarily pushing any boundaries or delivering, and I mean I get why Heccu's frustrated with it, because it's not. It just feels like it's more of the same that we've been getting in terms of tournaments that get 4,000 average viewers and then no real reason to tune in, because I will probably just tune in later to the like grand finals type aspects anyways.
Yeah, I will say go on.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, like, it's not a bad tournament. It's just, to me, it felt like they were advertising one thing and we got a different product. And this is like, since I was hyped for this product, I felt disappointed. As that's why I'm like I was ranting, basically.
No, that's good, because that's the thing. The key thing there is your perspective in the scene is different to maybe mine, for example. Like, for example, I'm an elitist. I actually don't give a fuck about anyone outside the top 10, basically. And so if you have a tournament or a LAN or whatever, it's like, there's all these teams that are small aren't allowed. And I'm like, I just don't care, mate. I mean, remember, I'm not from your region, so I have no special reason to hope the Baltic teams rise up. In fact, I'm even more cynical. Like, when I see, like, your Kindar and Brokey leave, I'm like, good, if you're good, just fucking leave. Like, because again, I'm not from the region. I don't have to care. I've watched the game so long, I can only care about Tier 1, and thankfully for me, the circuit's so huge, there's always going to be enough Tier 1 CS to watch. I don't need to go down to the lower levels. But obviously, there are areas I benefit. Like, in theory, if teams get really good and players get really good, it helps the whole scene and elevates the talent. But if I think from your perspective, if I was someone in a region that I wanted specifically to grow and have better chances and more exposure, yeah, the problem with this project is it did basically imply that. And as you say, that was even essentially the unique selling point. It's like, that's the whole reason why you would watch this tournament over Snow Sweet Snow or a 9 to 5 Cup, or ones that, frankly, are the same product but more established and get even better teams. Because the difference is the Snow Sweet Snow Cups actually sometimes will get like Virtus Pro when they're like the 5th best team in the world, or ENTS when it's mainly smaller orgs. But it's like, in that scenario, either you don't qualify for the LAN, so you just play them all anyway, or you're like a team that's like way above the level of your org, and so you play them anyway because it's like you need the money. In this scenario, like, if you're just going to be a worse version of those tournaments, then I wouldn't watch this competition for any reason. And in this scenario, like, it doesn't even serve the purpose. Like you said, that's the key thing. I think the key point that you nailed in the clarification was that if actually the points you get on this qualify you to the studio LAN, it is the antithesis of what they were claiming. It's not developing the talent and showing you like who are the best teams from this Baltic region and then like Southern Europe and stuff, and then let's see them go to the LAN and how they do. Because it's like, basically, who's the one team who isn't MIBR and Fours and all these teams that are really good and, by the way, could qualify for a major, and then they're going to somehow be there. I even think that's not even a smart way to do it. That's why I asked you the question to speculate, because I suspect that either they never really believed the initial thing they were saying. They were just selling that side maybe to make regional people want to watch. Or they got tempted by the idea of like, but actually MIBR is available, so if we threw them in, we'd get like the Brazilian viewership, and then, wait a second, Force can play. Well, all those Russians could watch then as well. And like, you're just seeing like the money signs in your eyes. We're growing as a league. And then maybe you even cynically think, we could be the next 9 to 5 Cup. It's like, that's not what the project was it? So my problem is, even if you actually even wanted to have like good teams at the same time to get eyeballs, I even think there's a smarter way to do it. Like, what I would do is this. There's 2 options I can think of that are obvious. I would do the normal cup like this with all the different regions. I would qualify you to the studio LAN, and then either give like a couple of invites to that LAN, 2 really famous teams like Fours or MIBR or some good squad that wants to come, or even do it like within the spirit of the competition. Like, have the studio LAN, then whatever teams win that LAN play like almost like the championship match against like MIBR or something, and it's almost like a show match, and maybe MIBR wins like more prize money. So you could have, there's a million ways you could structure this to actually accomplish accomplish all of your goals to like develop the regional talent, give them proper exposure, so it's not just a stupid online cup no one watches because it's regional, and then still have the viewership of Russia and Brazil and all these places that people want to access because it's how you make the money. Like, I feel like this is just a short-sighted. It's like in the short term, they've just made a load of promises and then just made like an okay product. But they could have gone, there's even creative ways you could have done this. I think that would be cooler, you know, that would even accomplish actually the goal that you're talking about.
Yeah,
I still don't care though. Like, it's all right for you to care. It's all good.
No, it's like I can tell you, like, you know, like, so since like I do interviews, obviously it's always like fun for me, like enjoyable to make interviews like with those like established names, you know, like maybe let's say like with Kerrigan, who has been like playing for many years, like now like won a major. Like it's always like, oh, this is cool. But I also really enjoy making interviews with players that like, you know, like exertion. Like he just came to the scene. He's super enthusiastic. He will give you an interview. He'll try to, you know, show himself. And for me, it's like, oh, I get to get this information in the beginning of his career, like to start help him, like to write the story. And as I said, like they're always enthusiastic. Kerrigan will always give like a really good interview, but he's been doing it for so many years. So it's like he'll be like, ah, another one, sure thing, like no problem. With these guys, it's like, oh, yes, okay, let's do it. You know, they're like, it's just a different atmosphere.
eSportsBet is still running their World's Prediction Series 2 competition, a free-to-enter 10 million USDT competition with up to 300,000 USDT for first place. And for people who message the mod mail on Discord, discord.gg/esportsbet, and say Thorin or Last Free Nation sent you, they will give you 50,000 DJT to play in this, giving you a massive head start on where everyone else began. Fair enough. Right, Mauisnake, what is your bad point?
Yeah, mine's pretty simple. That I think it's pretty horrible that G2 aren't actually attending the upcoming major. The RMR system is I don't even really blame the system that badly because they lost to one win and they lost to Gamer Legion. But I guess what could have been nice is just them not having to play this. But I guess it's like we've been kind of talking about. Actually, that's kind of my ugly point. I'll skip all that whole part of it. But I'll bring it back to G2. So basically, just not seeing G2, a top 10 team at the major, is pretty much everything against what I would want for a major. I think that seeing every top 10 team at it seems essential for it because, and also just given the fact that we're not going to see NiKo, Mauisnake, Hunter, I think that those three players in particular, not seeing them at a major is kind of why we want to watch majors. But I will zoom in even more on just Mauisnake because I think this guy has the possibility, has the chance to become an actually all-time great player based off of his trajectory so far, how good he looked under Hooksy when Hooksy first jumped into the team, and to see him robbed of a chance to play this would be his first one, right? So this would have been his first major, and for him not to have that chance, I hope he
No, he must have been at the last major, logically.
Wait, was he?
Yeah, because G2 was at the last major. They just didn't make it through the legend stage or whatever, right?
Yeah, they didn't make it to playoffs, okay. Yeah, so I mean, I think this guy needs more and more reps because I think that he has a chance to actually become one of the best players ever. And really, that just stunts his growth in a way. And I also think that when you look at how well they played at Pro League, how they actually qualified for the fall finals, this seems like such an aberration that I also don't love accepting it, but you know, some people are going to come back with they didn't qualify, so they don't deserve to be there. But given their most recent results, everything just stands against that. Like they were playoff, they beat Navi, they beat FaZe, they beat Vitality at Blast. Like they've beaten all these elite teams, and yet they just got owned by, I guess, BO1s and a Gamer Legion team that seemed incredibly motivated.
What do you think of that topic? It was obvious someone was going to pick it for this show as one of the bad or ugly. So what do you think, Heccu?
I do. To me, it feels like, obviously, like G2 not qualifying is horrible, but it feels like it's somehow like also like related to the format. It's easier for me to give examples of the Americas RMR because I will be honest, I was not watching the European one because I was too busy. There were just so many things happening in the Americas one. So like I was mostly like, you know, like I open HOTV, open Twitter, I can scroll like, oh, G2 didn't qualify. Oof, you know, like and things like that. But I feel like sometimes stronger teams can actually, maybe not really in the scenario of G2, but can actually have a harder path than the weaker teams. Because if we're looking like at for example, like at 9Z, yes, they had to play against 0 Nation, they had to play against Imperial, but they played best of ones, and that is the format where they can actually make an upset. That's the best chance they can actually do that. If it would be a best of 3, I'm not sure if they'll be able to do that. When it comes to, for example, complexity, yeah, like they start the first best of 1 against the weaker team, the second one against the weaker team, and afterwards they need to like win like best of 3s against Liquid, 0 Nation, and Imperial, like actually good teams. Like it kind of felt like for them, due to them having like this, due to them considered like a better team, they actually had a harder time, like this harder path. Not really probably the thing that worked for G2, because they kind of lost best of 3s to teams that they were supposed to win against. But I wonder if they were just maybe like underprepared. They were like, maybe Gamer Legion, things like that. I really hope that was not really the scenario, because otherwise it's just, I mean, at an RMR, you cannot have an attitude like that towards any team.
Yeah, one thing I would say about this that I find a bit strange is like this topic always comes up because it's essentially the same topic as to like when we had the online era, and when people like me are like, I don't really care about the results. People are like, yeah, but it's all that Counter-Strike is now, so it does matter, and if you are the best, you have to win. It's like, okay, so let's start with the one that Mauisnake mentioned, which is like the logic of like, but if they were that good, then why didn't they qualify? By that logic, by the way, I can justify the worst possible qualification system, because if you don't qualify, you weren't good enough, therefore you're not good enough to qualify. That's called circular logic. Like, it doesn't actually make any sense. Like, by that logic, if that's correct, that whoever qualifies is automatically deserving of it because that's what the qualification method is, then forget this current system. We're just going to have an enormous 128 team bracket that is going to be single elim, BO1, and we're going to play it all online, because if you qualify, you were good enough, you deserved to, you qualified, and if you didn't, well, you're not obviously good enough, and whoever beat you, if they're a lesser team, they're actually not a lesser team. By the way, here's what they don't do, and this is where people are intellectual cowards. If they actually believe what they're saying, I'll give it to the idiots on HLTV. They're obviously not you, the people on the forums. They actually are right, at least, and consistent, which is if they believe this format does mean that the good teams always qualify, then they're right to say G2's shit, they should never have signed Hoxie, NiKo's probably a bomb and should be fired, and mauisnake just isn't good enough, because logically, they're just not as good a team as Gamer Legion. That's what you're saying if you believe the format. Except that's not the case at all, is it? Obviously, first of all, form on any given day is fleeting for everyone. Like, except, I mean, what's funny is the only team this year you wouldn't have said that about would have been Na'Vi until Pro League. After Pro League, even Na'Vi it counts for. Even they will look like, if you don't know, when I was doing those bets, my biggest bet loss this year is because I put loads on Na'Vi to beat that dog shit NIP team when it ended up being the last match, and Na'Vi had already qualified, so they didn't even they just gave up the third map and lost it, right? Well, logically, does that mean NiP was good? NiP themselves immediately castrated the lineup and were like, Jesus! And then Na'Vi themselves weren't going like, this is fine, this is all brilliant. Like, that's an example of how form for anyone is fleeting. So what you do in the qualifier when you do this method is, it's how good you are on that day. That determines if you play in the World Championship. It's not really how good you are as a team. And then also there's another aspect. This is what, in my opinion, one of the biggest factors that made online players suck wasn't just the idea that it's online and low LAN, and those are big factors. It's also that you're thrown together, like those Snow Cups, people from totally different tiers. Now, if people don't know, there's a really famous saying that encapsulates this. It's the one where it says, if you are the greatest swordsman in the world, you don't fear the second greatest swordsman, you fear the man who has never held a sword. Because the premise goes, because he doesn't even know the rules of engagement and the meta of how you sword fight. He might just do something random that's wrong and just kill you outright. Like, he might just do a stab like that. You're like, what the hell? Straight in your eye. Like, you're expecting someone to start doing this and parrying. So basically, I think that's also what happens when you go to enormous RMRs like this and you play people you don't know and you don't practice against. Because there's another angle people forget. Not only when I'm a top 10 team, am I basically spending all my time studying the top 10 teams, I'm practicing them. So that means my whole practice is how I play against the best teams with the best protocols, the best. So if I play teams you've never heard of and you've never scrimmed against, you don't have any info on them, they actually might play objectively worse, but that might work against you. It might even stylistically work. There's another angle people forget as well. Are we going to act like there's not teams? There's classic ones like this. There'll be a team that's like 11th in the world, but they always beat the number 3 team if they play them. They're not as good as the number 3 team, and they would never win a tournament like the number 3 team would. They're just a stylistic counter. Maybe the maps they play are the right ones. They have the right style. I mean, I think Outsiders has basically done this the last like 2 months. They're clearly not an elite team, but I tell you what, there's a lot of elite teams that are like, fucking hell, have we just drawn Outsiders in the next game? Like, bloody hell, like, can't we just have some team that's better than them, but like we could beat like Ents or something, you know? Like, that's what they're even thinking of. So the mad thing is, I think there's all that as well. Then I'll throw this angle in, because by the way, on the whole angle of like, but if you were better, you would win. Lurpus actually made a point like this years ago that I thought just fell apart completely, but no one picked the holes in it, right? What he did was, because he was also looking at tournament formats, he went and he looked, and obviously the famous thing we all say is like, well, BO1's like a little bit more random or has like more variance, you know, and it's like the underdog, like you said, Heccu, can win more often in a BO1. And what Lurpus did, because this is the downside, he was just using his like math background, and he didn't really think of like the qualitative judgment. So what he did, as far as I know, is he went and took like a few tournaments, and he just looked at like whenever the favourite plays the underdog, like do they win in a BO1 and do they win in a BO3? And at the end, the problem is the percentage of win rate of like how many games they won was roughly the same for the matches, right? So his conclusion was, it doesn't matter. Like in BO1, actually the better team wins about the same amount of times. Now the problem with that is that was never the argument we were all making, because we're always making the argument when it's someone like G2, right? Like, let's be real, if everyone went through in the BO1s who was good, well, no one would give a fuck if it was BO1s, we'd go, great, whatever, it's less matches, just get the tournament done. But the argument you actually want to make if you're talking to Lurpus in that scenario is, I don't care about every team in the whole field playing BO1s. I want to know, for example, Mauisnake, when the top 5 teams in the world play a BO1, do they lose more often? And I think on that one, obviously I'm going from anecdotal evidence, I would say that's got to be enormously so. Like, the difference is, you can beat Na'Vi in a BO1 when you would never in a million years beat them in a BO3. Like, I think for that one, it has to be different. So I'll bring it back to the format a second. Because even though people are going to look at, like you said there, and they're going to go, but they lost to 1 win and then they lost to Gamer Legion. Yeah, wait a second. They lost to 1 win in, let's just go ahead and have a look. So they lost to 1 win in a BO1, correct?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That's bad, but it's a BO1. And then they lost to Gamer Legion in a BO3. So my problem with that logic goes like this. Why does G2 get to have a harder path at certain times and just basically get 1 less life? Because here's what doesn't make any sense about this tournament if it was a real tournament. ESL would never do this. Blast would never do. They all seed their tournaments. If you seed your tournaments and you are G2 and you beat Ecstatic, you will never, ever possibly get Cloud9 as the next opponent. That is impossible. Cloud9 is also another top 6 team in the world. It would be impossible to ever draw them. Meanwhile, you go to the same round, so that's the 1-0 game, and you go, look who else is playing in that, right? NIP's playing Bad News Eagles. Spirit and Sprout are playing each other. Like, why do they get an easier opponent in the BO1 than G2? And then G2 plays a top team. That's 1 tournament life gone, guys. You have 3 tournament lives here. One of their tournament lives is burned just by the seeding. Because remember, the problem with this is, and I'm not saying it like we could change it because Valve's not going to change it apparently. Valve treats it like the major is its own unique thing and exists separate from the rest of the scene. And their logic really is how you do in the qualification determines if you get to play in the World Championship. I'm coming more from like a sports background. I think of it like tennis. It's like if you're like top 10 in the world, you don't start in like an open qualifier or something. You go to like a certain portion, you're like in the Grand Slam already, and then you see how you do. Yeah, you can still lose, but we want all the top players there and the top team, and then we decide who's the best. So theirs is more like, you just qualify to the World Championship, then we see who's the best. I want it to be the best teams, and then we see who is the winner of the World Championship. Those are different things he's selecting for there, you notice. And then the one other thing I would say is this. I don't think this means G2 isn't good at all. Like, this is a blip on the radar for me. Yeah, the couple of these matches aren't that great. By the way, Gamer Legion 1 suddenly looks way better now, doesn't it? Because you go look who they played in this tournament. They were good at like every single match, and they qualified for the major. It'd be one thing if they lost to 1 win, and then 1 win just fucks off right out of the tournament. That's a different matter entirely. So I think on that whole topic, like, I think people have got really confused with some of that. And then also, I'll just say this is why in general, to me, it's obvious what you do is the next level up. Like, I already hate, like I said, randomized system of seeding for Swish. I hate the idea that it's even randomized in the next session. Like for example, in my opinion, the reason you seed it also is because when you win the BO1 and you're like FaZe Clan, you should play the worst team in the 1-0 match. That just seems obvious to me, but that's because I'm selecting for a different thing. So the other angle you could do is just make them all BO3s. This is what I'll say right now. As much as I'll complain about seeding, at the same time, if G2 loses 3 BO5s out of 5, BO3s out of 5, I said that the wrong way. If they manage to play 5 BO3s and lose 3 of them, then I'm actually fine with them not making the major. Unless it was some really crazy scenario where they really drew like FaZe into Na'Vi into Vitality. Unless that happens, I could at least live with that. I could sleep in that scenario. This one, I am just going to think the whole time. But they're not shit though, are they? They like lost a very close game in this scenario. They never should have been playing Cloud9 anyway. And yeah, like that one sucks because the difference is you go and look at some of the other teams that qualify, like a Heccu point she was saying, right? Here's how Sprout qualified. Remember, they're in the same RMR. They're in the other RMR. No, they're in the same RMR.
They're the same.
Right. So the problem is we're doing the logic of like, well, Sprout, congratulations to you. You idiots in fucking G2. You're not even good enough, right? Sprout played Force, Spirit, best of 3 against FaZe, and then best of 3 against B8. Which is harder out of those.
This is a joke.
You know what I mean? So in that scenario, you weren't both, like in that scenario, that's like one person swam a record time in like a 50-meter pool, and the other guy had an 80-meter pool to swim in, and he swam like the same time, and you're like, you failed. It's like, well, that pool was longer. So that I just want it to feel like it's a coherent approach. We all know what's going on. The good thing about the BO3 one, like I said, is even the players wouldn't complain if they lost in that. They would just go, okay, we weren't good enough. We'll win the BO3s next time. So whatever. There's my rant.
Yeah, but also I want to say kind of like the amount of preparation that, for example, like a stronger team has and a weaker one. Because if we're talking, for example, like G2, probably the moment they start preparing for Gamer Legion was the day before. Like, so
sure.
Like they find out their opponent, they start preparing from zero. They basically don't know anything. Gamer Legion, on the other hand, probably they've been watching their demos for like a few months. They probably have strats when they say like, hey, we're doing the G2 execute. They already know what to expect. So like the amount of preparation, which is usually has like a big influence on the outcomes. Like here it's like one of the reasons, again, like why an underdog can actually win just by this like fact.
Right. What is let me see. Actually, I've just realised I completely burned my point. My point actually was about the format. So whatever, I'll switch my point up. I'll pick a different.
I mean, I was kind of talking about the format later too. Yeah.
All right, I see. Well, it's all right. We can switch it up a little bit. There's plenty of other things that are bad in the scene. What shall I pick as bad then? All right, I'll tell you what, I'll swap it to this then. I actually do think, on your point, but I'll expand it. I actually think of all the things that are bad about people qualifying, it's just the fact that NiKo won't be at the major is inherently terrible for the major. Like, you know, when people would say in that angle, like, oh, it wouldn't be the same having a major in Rio if, like, Fallen wasn't there. Like, you know, he's not going to do anything at the major, and he's almost immediately going to get bounced. Like, that's just a pure narrative one. Here's the difference. Yeah. NiKo could have fucked around being the MVP and won the whole thing. Like, that's massive for his career, for G2, the organisation, for, like, the fucking scene, what that would mean. It might even change, like, the other teams might all make roster moves depending on what happens. Like, that could be like one of those like butterfly effect moments that change the entire landscape of Counter-Strike. And then also, unfortunately, right, this is again where people are going to use the circular logic. They're going to go, if you look, right, because I think he had like a 1.05 rating, they're going to go, well, he also didn't play well though, so he didn't deserve to get there, right? Again, you're not setting a fair expectation for every player. Do you think that every single great player smurfed every qualifier for the major and every RMR? No. Some of them just got carried by your teammate. Sometimes their team just won a bunch of narrow games. The idea you had like one bad performance means you can't be at the major. Like, look, that is how it will work, but like now, because what people will do now is this, they'll actually try and imply like, G2 sucks as a team. NiKo's not a good player anymore. It's like none of those things are accurate. Like this is the outlier. Like I doubt this ever happens again in his career. By the way, that'll now be the clip that'll be in the next fucking one if they feel like an IP style and the next RMR. Because by the way, shout out to Huxley. He did actually make a rod for his own back with that fucking statement on this show. If you remember, Matt, when he was in Copenhagen Flames, his bad point, Heccu, was that it's too easy to qualify to majors because he was sort of making a self-deprecating joke about Copenhagen Flames qualifying to all those majors. Well, obviously that came back to bite him because it got played immediately when G2 didn't make it like a super team. Like, listen, I look. That's why, by the way, I love banter, but it will be used against you. Let's be real. That's the way the game works. So I just think it's terrible for the game not to have NiKo there. It's not like I'm saying like he has to be like automatically given a spot no matter what, and he can never not qualify. I just think though, if you're looking at the history of the game, even spin it this way. Even if you are, by the way, Bad News Eagles or BA or some of these teams, right? If you're one of the teams that made it to the major, even though you were on borderline, if you were to then make an epic run, like when Spirit almost made the final of the last one, imagine if you don't get to play against a NiKo or a Simple or something like that. You would want to beat that guy to make it to the final as well. They're the people you want to test yourself and prove yourself better than. You're not really going like, oh, fucking hell, I can't wait to get into some of that Gamer Legion ass. Like, no one cares, mate. No one gives a flying fuck. It won't even be remembered, that match. So it's actually for the championship, if possible, you do want all the great players there. You even want it so that for each other's legitimacy.
Yeah, I feel like as spectators, we kind of lost like one of the storylines because usually like when the major starts, we put questions, like for example, the Stockholm one, there were like multiple, but like once we reached the final, we're like, okay, who is getting the major, like the major title? Is it going to be finally NiKo or is it going to be finally Simple? Like we're like one or the other one is happening. Again, like for the previous one, like I guess it was, is Kerrigan finally getting it? Is he getting to live that trophy that like he was probably supposed to get many years ago, but finally gets it? And right now, right from the beginning, the major, we already cross out like NiKo getting a major right away, which is a big storyline. Like, and like also like G2 is not getting a major, like just right away, and we're like losing so much from that.
Yeah, I want to pick up on the point that you made about just anybody else's run is no longer as legitimate because G2 isn't a part of who they're beating. Because you kind of think of, or at least what I think of, is that the PGL Krakow major with Gambit and them beating Immortals in the grand finals. I mean, I liked it. I thought, I mean, it's a legitimate major win and everything like that. But you kind of look at their run up to it, and they didn't really. Well, they beat Astralis in the semis, which was probably their biggest win of that whole thing. But they didn't beat. I think the present number one. I'm not sure who the number one
SK
ranked
at
team.
the time.
Okay, yeah.
Well,
So they didn't
beat SK.
Yeah, so they didn't get to beat the number one, number two teams, which were SK and FaZe.
Yep.
So that also makes that major run just look so much more fluky than it would otherwise. So that devalues their greatness, and so. Yeah, that's just something, because now imagine it's just like Gamer Legion is like your quarterfinal matchup. Like people are just gonna be like, the road you had to win the major is just not even that impressive. Even if Gamer Legion go on to be a great team, this is kind of them just becoming a budding one right now.
And here's the other thing I'll throw in as well, because you notice what I try to do is I don't just try to like look at the opinion and look at their point. I try to infer like what are they trying, what like do they want in the tournament if they think that's good. So here's the problem when people are like, look, the format's totally fine. It's like, wait a minute, if you actually think also that best of threes are better, and you do believe Gamer Legion, like in their case, obviously they beat them in a best of three, but you believe, for example, that one win should beat G2. Well, then if they beat them in a best of three, it's even better for one win. By the way, no one will ever remember one win winning this game against them, except in the context of why didn't G2 make it. No one's going like, ooh, better watch out for one win now. Look, they only beat them in a best of one though. But I tell you what, people want that for Gamer Legion, win or lose. If Gamer Legion never qualified in that scenario, like people would have been excited still. They were like, dude, they beat G2 in a best of three on LAN. So also it makes the underdog win more legit. And that's why I can say if they'd lost 3 out of 5, I could live with that. And also it may make me way more hyped for one win if they'd beat them in a best of 3. Then you'd be like, hey, maybe I better pay attention to this team. Also, if they can beat them in a best of 3, wait a minute, that's the playoff format. Dude, they could do something in the major. Whereas now it's like, even if they'd qualified, you'd go, well, as soon as they get to the BO3s, they're out, aren't they? And by the way, they were. So that, if anything, that played out that way. Right, what about, we'll go to the ugly points now. So what is your ugly point, Heccu?
My ugly point, I guess, is the whole situation that is either happened and is happening right now with Config, because he is out of Astralis. We saw like his statement. So if I'm like, we're looking at his statement, it's like, oh, it's like, it feels like maybe Astralis should have like helped him in this like hard time and not just full on like say like, hey, sorry, like we're breaking the contract and stuff like that. Or maybe his story is not, maybe there's still something that he's not telling, and that is what actually motivating Astralis to break the ties like so quickly. It is overall like an ugly situation for both parties. You know, like, I don't even like know how what to say in this scenario. Just it's sad, it's ugly, and no one is a winner in this scenario.
Well, Astralis probably think they are winners in some sense, which is a mistake on their end. That's something, that's what I first took away from this whole instantly departing move, or like instant removal, was that it seems like Astralis want to clear the books for a device move in, and for them to hold Config to this kind of standard now, where like people, without saying any names or anything like that, people, talent, players, people have gotten into stuff like this before.
Oh, for sure.
Not to the extent maybe where they always broke their legs or anything.
There's been fights though. There's been punch-ups,
yes,
and people getting way too leery in bars and have to cut course their ass. Yeah, loads of times.
There's been police called on different people this year, like, but it just doesn't get out. So, and it's not going to get out right now. But I mean, none of those people are out of their jobs or anything like that. And then suddenly Astralis is like, yep, that's where we draw the line. by the way, we're gonna get device. Like that seems like the inevitability from what just happened here. So I just find it to be like I don't know the ground Astralis are necessarily standing on when they make this kind of move where they are trying to act like they're doing it for I don't know, is this supposed to be a disciplinary action or like it's not even disciplinary, it's actually just removal. It's actually like there's no rehabilitation here actually. It's just straight up you're gone. So not even a probation period or anything like that. So that to me, that always strikes me really poorly when people are just like, boom, gone. And it's not like he was even the worst player on the team. Like Zipnix has been playing terribly. Farlig has not been playing that well either. Config's been streaky and inconsistent, but I wouldn't say he's been worse than either of those two names I just mentioned. So it just kind of feels a little too convenient for me from the side of Astralis that they are just ready to go and remove somebody. And probably a guy that had a pretty decent salary so that this device one isn't so much of a blow to them, whereas Farlig's contract, I'm sure, is much easier on the books.
Yeah, but for example, it would make sense if at least they would play the same position. Like, oh, we have this guy that we are having trouble. Let's bring in Device. He will be our solution, right? But here, one is a rifler, one is an opper. Then the question is like, what is happening? Is like they're all got like old opper is being put in the rifling position, or if he's also getting out, then like who is going to rifle? Like it's just like too many questions that right now we don't have answers to.
Yeah, one thing I will say on that as well is like no one ever brings this up, I notice, which is why I actually do get the feeling that people just selectively pretend they care about the Academy League. Why is the player coming to Astralis never the academy player as the permanent fifth player? That's never even been on the table. A lot of people, by the way, some people mistakenly think Lockie was in their academy team. They don't know he was on like Tricked or whatever. Like, I know the Mr. guy stood in for the RMR. By the way, that didn't go well. Like, have you noticed that? Like, that's the problem. Astralis has the Astralis talent team. By the way, the most cursed team name ever if you don't actually have fucking good players. Astralis talent. It's like, mate, it's anything but talent. Like, you've actually filtered out the players from the scene that fucking suck. So, well done, I guess.
I can tell you a worse name. 0-0 prospects.
That's a very good one. Yes.
That's way worse. That because
yes.
there's no prospects for them. Like
yeah, that is pretty funny. Yeah, I will say.
I can tell you about like the Astralis talent situation. So like at least like in the first seasons of the WePlay Academy League, they were competing with Furia for the bottom spot. They were not good. So like none of the players that were on that roster could potentially be brought in. It is not a scenario of Mauisnake XT or maybe like Big, like after they went through some changes. None of them work on that level. Then they went through some changes and they started showing better results, but still like none of the players were like truly like the next Monazi
sure.
Or maybe like even like Grimbo. Like, no. And like one of the problems for that is because usually the players that you get to this level signed from like your region, they're already playing for other organizations because Denmark is so developed so that they actually have organizations like for like tier 2, tier 3, and they can, if you know, like if it's like a Monazi, he'll be playing for an organization that's like in a tier 2, tier 3, and he'll be able to play RMRs. He'll be able to play all of the events and try to compete and get through maybe like an open qualifier to a bigger thing. Right, like by going into this like Astralis thing, you first of all like you're limiting yourself the amount of tournaments that you can actually play, just because like you cannot play like open qualifiers for Blast and stuff like that, right? And I as I said, like you go to like a different one because there were just so many of them.
No, I'm just saying, to me, it just shows that like their academy squad doesn't in any way function like that, and they clearly don't think it does either. Like they're not really ever thinking like, hey, I could give this guy a try, maybe it works for a few. They're just sort of like, no, bring in like another player. The joke is they did bring in Farley. Like it's like just get another known player, like you said, actually someone else who's in the tier 2 or tier 3 team. So that part's whack. Then there's the whole angle that like absolutely, I do think this is just done because it's bad PR, it's bad optics. By the way, if people don't know, you can even tie this into the whole G2 Carlos situation, because if people don't realise, it wasn't really fans complaining that got him removed. What got him removed is that they are a company with shareholders and massive investors and sponsors that will just, they might see that and go, right, well, I'm going to leave. Or if you don't do something like you're going to tank like the stock price, or people aren't going to invest anymore, or they're going to pull out next round of investment, right? In that scenario, Astralis is in the same position. They're on the Danish stock market. They're a team that, by the way, at the moment currently only survives off optics. They're not one of the top teams in the world. They're not winning big tournaments anymore. In in League of Legends, they also have like not a very good team. They're actually living right now off the idea of their whole brand of like, remember, we're like the most professional team. Look, it's all nonsense if you know behind the scenes, but that's what they've built the brand of. Like, we were the professional ones and we had the right team org, we have sports science, because they tried to imply, obviously, that's why they won all the majors and that's why that team was the best ever, etc. So in my opinion, like, since that's one thing they've got is this idea, like, Astralis is just giant org, like, they just don't think this is good PR. They think essentially like it probably makes them look like unprofessional. You're getting in fights in this scenario. Now even the stuff there's the other thing that I also find really suspicious is that they were dealing with it behind the scenes, but they had officially only said he was like out because of the fracture and that they were using the stand-in for the RMR. They never said anything about his future at the time. I really wonder if those further articles coming out that basically showed, because remember when it said ankle fracture, that could have been anything. That could be you played football outside. You could even just go down the stairs and you don't notice the last step and tripped and break it. If that was the case, you're not getting kicked for that. What gets you kicked is when stories come out where it's like, actually he was having a fight with someone at a nightclub. Like, what the fuck? First of all, he's in nightclubs, he's having a fight. What? And then it was like, then it's like a club promoter and he spat at him and then he had to fight the guy. And it's like those are the worst possible stories that could come out. Like, if you wanted to talk about stories that could kill your career, those are the ones right there. So then you add in the fact that, like you also said as well, Mauisnake, if the team isn't going to do well, this might sound cynical, but unless you actually really think you can win, you don't want to pay loads of salary to loads of people. Actually, this might be a contract you want to offload. You might, in the temporary meantime, even when Device comes back, remember, they don't have to win immediately. Everyone's going to know he's been out for ages. He's going to work his way back into the team. That's even if he does come back. Obviously, there's that whole story where we don't even know for certain he's actually going to come back. It's just implied he will. So I do think there's a lot of fuckery with it. But the worst part about it to me is, I think both parties just lose in the long run. Astralis won't be as good. There's no player, by the way, in Denmark that plays Config's roles that's going to be better than that's coming to this team. I don't even think there is in Denmark. Like, look at all the rest. Like, is TeSeS better than Config? I don't think he is, personally. So I don't think there was any way you'd get better because of this move. And if you look at the history of Astralis, guys, Blame F and Config are the only big names they've ever signed that weren't the original five. They've never signed anyone since the Magisk lineup. Like, the players that came in were Bobski and then fucking all those weird pickups that weren't real, like Yugi, and then they had Essa Tag for a while. Like, these aren't like big names. So like, Config was a big name. Like, that was one where, yeah, you hoped his career like went up again, but like that was like that was a chance to be really good. So now, yeah, it also messes up the whole hype of the Device move. The whole hype of the Device move was like, right, basically it's only Zipnik's left to worry about. And even then, by the way, I'd use like the JKS logic. Like, he doesn't even have to be that good if you have Config and Blame F and Device and you got Clave as your IGL. Like, you're like, hey, let's at least have a chance. You can maybe go to a final with that. You can win a tournament if you get lucky. If you don't and you just bring in Device back after a year off the game and now you just lost Config, it's like the team's probably not going to be that great even when Device joins, if he indeed joins. So I think that just sucks all around. And then as well, the way this has been handled, I have to say, even though Config did that twit longer where he tried to give his whole side and stuff, the problem with that, by the way, is it is just still he said, she said. Like, for all we know, we can't know how much that's true. He's shaping his own way. Like, in that scenario, we just have to believe him if you like him. That's the premise, right? So in that scenario, that won't do as much as you hope. I know it got sympathy from the fans, but if you're an org, you know, a player might say that anyway. So I'm sorry, like, you're not just going, oh, well, in that case, it's okay that you had the fight. Like, it's just, you could happen to anyone, and that's okay. What you're hearing in that story, by the way, some of it's even worse in a fucked up way, Maui. You know, like, a lot of people were like, wow, like, congrats to Config for his bravery. Dude, in some ways, he made it worse, though, by telling that story. Like, in the story, he literally essentially admits he can't control his anger, and that when the guy spat at him, this is the maddest part, because he thought that thing like a little kid thinks, like, if I'm just honest, like I'll get the right result, like, people will forgive me or whatever. But actually, that story makes him sound even worse. The original story was just he had some sort of a fight with someone in a club and he broke his ankle, right? Here's the problem with his version of it. In his version of it, he just keeps going in this scenario. Like, the guys sort of tell him, like, fuck off, kid. And he just keep on going, oh, you have to let me in there, like my friends. Then the guy's kicking him in his head. Dude, if it just even ended there and he broke his ankle, it's like, okay, that could happen to anyone, I guess. It makes it worse when he tells the part that he goes outside the club. He's sitting there. Then he's like, it's like that guy. And then chases after him like, dude, this is PR suicide. What are you doing? Like, that makes it sound like you are just a nutter. And if you've had too many drinks or whatever, or someone provokes you, you can't, like, it's like that thing, you're like the Incredible Hulk, you just see red and then you go after the guy. Now, it's all well and good you put that part, like, you know, I'm going to see like a psychologist or whatever, like, I understand I've got problems, I've got to deal with it. The problem with that is everyone knows that's not like a magic bullet. You don't just cure that overnight. Like, it's going to be a process, and you're also going to have to do things like probably have to be a lot more careful if you go out drinking. What can you do in these nights? So unfortunately, even though to me, Config's a mega talent, and this is the player I would gamble on and hope that he gets those things right, there's a lot of teams out there will genuinely just think, Yeah, it's not like he's simple though, so I'm just not going to gamble on it. You know what? Get the next good player. Remember, nowadays it didn't even have to be Danish anymore. We've got all these fucking international players. What they're going to do instead is they're going to look around the scene and they're going to go, look, I'll give an extreme example. He's not as good as Config, but this is one. They're going to look and go like, you know what? Maybe Maus didn't like BMAS, but he's not a bad little player. He's got a decent AK. I've never heard any stories like that about him, because that's the other thing I'll quickly throw in there. It's not just the case that Config had a track record of similar behaviour, obviously not fighting people almost to the death and get his leg broken, but just like being a bit argy, potentially getting in like scuffles. I've even heard stories where it happened in Astralis. So it's like, that's the other problem with that one. Even though I do think like Astralis is fucked up, and I do think it's a bit evil to do it, because here's the other thing. All those orgs always sell it to the public that they're a family and that they like care about the person. Yeah. It's like, well, this isn't what you do. If your family member did that, you wouldn't go, oh, you've been a dickhead, I'm fine, get up my family then. Like, that's not what you do to family. So I just hate that angle. Like, as an org angle, if I'm just thinking of some guy in a boardroom who doesn't understand Counter-Strike, doesn't know what talent Config has, and he just hears this story and goes, well, we can replace him, right? And, you know, maybe even have like a few months without the salary or whatever. Like, and then the last thing I'll throw in there is that people are going to think it's been a nice org that they cancelled the contract instead of making him sit on the bench and try and sell him. I think that implies something really bad, which is, one, I don't think they thought anyone would pay a buyout. I think they genuinely thought, like, if we ask for a buyout, already no one wants this guy anyway because of what's just happened. And then two, I know this will sound fucked up, I think that the reason why you cancel his contract like that is I think what happened is this. I think that phrasing is really tricky. It sounds, Maui, like you just go, you know what, we both just go our separate ways. You're not in Astralis anymore. You're not helping. I think what that actually means is you officially don't play for us and you're released. But I think behind the scenes they were like, but you can keep like the last 3 months' salary. Because the reason I think you do that is because you don't ever want him to do the one where it's like, oh, well, now they kicked me and fucked me over. Right. Thorin reflections with Config. Why Astralis fucking sucks. Like, and then he go into all the detail. This is where, you know what, if you give him those 3 months salary or whatever, you might start going, yeah, you know what, they were kind of a cool org, and you know, it wasn't so bad. It was my fault the way it ended. So I also think it's one of those topics that like, you have to wait years to really know what happened with him and Astralis here, and what the push and pull was, and did he jump, was he pushed, all that. It'll take years before that'll come out. We won't get that like in 3 months, in my opinion.
I get really annoyed with the family angle, like where Astralis always does this. This is the quote, actually, I found it from them signing. They will forever be a part of the Astralis family, and no matter what path they choose on behalf of every single person in Astralis, I wish them the very best, says Casper Vitt. And it's like, you literally just like break up with your family members. Like, what? Just don't use that term. It's just, I think it's always just like, it's just so fake. It's just the fakest
I know.
shit.
No one believes it. I know it sounds cool, but no one believes it if you're in the scene. You know, it's just orgs and companies, you know.
Yeah, like just be honest. Just be a little bit more real on that end. I mean, what's so ugly about this, I guess, for me to sum up my thoughts, is that this could actually just ruin a lot of Config's chances for the future, and maybe his life too, because after something like that, especially with, unless we see some serious rehabilitation from him on his end, and but like, this is a huge drop for him, and it's going to be a while before, one, anybody believes they can take a chance on him, and two, I think he probably has to work his way up from a tier 2, tier 3 team now. I don't see any way a tier 1 org is going to take a risk on him. Even though you listed all those ones in your tweet about ones that probably should, it just doesn't seem like it's likely given the situation and everything he put out there publicly himself.
I'd say it probably like really depends on what kind of potential like organization could be interested in him, because you know, if something like this would happen maybe from one of the players of like Bad News Eagles, they'll be like, what can we say, they have hot blood, they're emotional, happens, right? But Astralis is one of those teams that really cares about their PR. Like, that's like their players are like the most PR trained, you know, like whenever I have like interviews, Config was like the one that felt the least Astralis, like when it comes to interviews. You know, he was just saying like the way how he feels. It didn't feel like, you know, like you couldn't see this like media training with him, at least. So I think there is maybe probably there's like a chance for him like to come back, and potentially whatever org will sign him, they can change like the narrative that like, hey, we helped him like to get him like out of this situation, like out of like him like hating himself, hating the whole situation, and probably like in the future, like due to like getting like such like a strong like, you know, like wrist slap by Astralis, he'll be like really try to hold himself whenever that happens again, potentially maybe happen again. Like, like if he feels like actually going and hitting something, you're like, okay, no, like last time it went bad. Okay, let's calm down. So it's kind of like a really rough lesson for him, like a really, really rough one. But yeah, I hope that eventually he'll be able to come back.
Right. What about, obviously, you're going to have to think something else up.
I got a different
What is your ugly
different
point?
Yeah, I got a different one. It's a low-hanging fruit for the Mauisnake brand, but it is what it is because I had to change from the format.
Complexity
topic.
by any chance?
No. It's that now for several tournaments this year, Big have had to take Favin out, and I think I think that has pretty bad implications because he's had to skip Rubet, he skipped Cologne, he skipped the RMRs. There might have been one more actually, but those are the ones that I was able to come up with. Like he's not able to play consistently, and I don't know. I mean, going all the way back to when I made that prediction that they could make it top 5 if things went well after the Favin move, it's a lot harder for them to make top 5 with the Favin move if Favin's not playing for them. So this is like I still think that this is a great move for Big, but if this is going to keep happening where Favin has some medical illness, because they haven't really said publicly what it was in some of them, they're just like, he's ill, he needs to be at home. This could be COVID, could be something else completely. And so if I assume the latter, then how are they supposed to use the biggest signing in German esports history if he doesn't get to play for the team? So that's kind of where I'm at right now, because and to remark upon me saying that they could be top 5 within 6 months, they made top 7 in 6 months from me saying that, with Favin not playing 2 consecutive events. So I wasn't that far off, okay? Like that, like even though I get clowned for that one a lot, like they were right there. They were right there with the guy that I said the reason they could make it top 5 not playing. So yeah, just that. That's kind of where I'm at with Big. Like they barely qualified for the major. Thankfully they did, but also it would have probably been a lot easier if they... I mean, Sin played pretty decently, but I also think it would have been even easier if they just had their normal 5th player.
I will say, by the way, the only problem with that is, like, here's the problem, Maui. Predictions. No one is really psychic, so no one can actually know what's going to happen in the future. We're all just guessing and going on probabilities, right? But when you say a prediction like that, right, your analysis was all good. Like, you gave good reasons as to why and how it could improve. But you can't go, like, they will be top 5, because all the juice is in the 5 part there, Maui. It's like they're top 5. You weren't just like, they'll be good. And you'd be right if you said that. And by the way, that wouldn't be a controversial take. You'd never get a headline for that. So if your take is they get top 5, you can't go, well, 7th, 2 less than 5. No, the whole thing was based on top 5. So I know what you mean. In general, you were quite right about your points. The prediction was pretty good. And it could also, they could have fluked one extra match or something and gotten top 5. True. That's true. But you don't get
just not gotten sick.
You don't get credit for the 7th part. No, you're right on that, by the way. That's the part that really invalidates it. Just didn't use that lineup. So the lineup you were talking about never had that problem. What do you think on this topic, Heccu? The fact that Big, they just can't keep the stable lineup, right?
Yeah, so it really depends. So different teams function differently. To me, it feels like tabseN, he really needs for the team to be stable in a way that there's no new changes, there's no new additions, so they can figure out their strats and all of that. It's not always the case for every team, and I guess an IP is a great example of what was happening. When they had ZTR, LNZ, Fuzi, every time they come into a tournament, I absolutely would not believe in them because you just brought in a guy. What can you do? And then they almost reach a grand final, and you're like, okay, one-time thing, and they just keep on doing it over and over and over again. For them, it works because probably the way how Hampus used to lead the team, it was all good. Now, I guess for Big, it doesn't work out because of the way how their IGL works. So I really want to see stable results from Big. I'm not a fangirl like Maui is, but I do enjoy them as people.
She's not actually calling him a fangirl there. She's just joking on that she would be the fangirl, just in case it gets lost in translation there. That's not as edgy as that seemed. Okay.
Of course. But basically, it's just this is
okay.
It's just you want good results for one of the from the biggest German team because of how it is just the whole system works. It's just there were so many big events in Germany, Cologne being the cathedral of Counter-Strike. You want it to be represented by a stable team, and so far they are a good team, but they are not stable.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with a lot of the points across the board. Like, first of all, on the whole big angle, I actually think the thing that really sucks as well, and this actually sucks for your point as well, Mauisnake, is obviously the difference between big now and the big that was really good online 2 years ago is now they actually are a German team again, and it is all about like the German scene, and that's where they got those players, and that's what they were going to. So if they had have been a top 5 team on land now, that would be enormous for like that whole organization, the project, even the concept, by the way, of staying in German Counter-Strike. Like, I would have told you until this year, you're a fool if you stay in German Counter-Strike. You're just limiting yourself. You've already got players that have played in international teams. Just make them speak English. By the way, they all speak English. It's just how fluent and quickly they'd obviously be. I understand that's going to affect the tactical element, but obviously the angle you would tell them, and it does make sense, is you can get a star player. It doesn't have to be Xantares again, but it could be, you could have had Son Pius or something. I mean, he wouldn't get him because he's an AWP, but you know what I mean? You could have had some star rifler come in and tear everything up, and then you could maybe be challenging for the championships yourself. So that angle sucks, because I do actually think if they'd have kept the stable lineup, I don't know if they'd have actually been top 5, but look, they were in the mix, and obviously like they would be at this major with the real 5 lineup, and they would actually have they would be playoff bait maybe. They'd probably be on the fringe or make the playoffs and come quarterfinals. And the other thing I think sucks about that in general is I do think actually if you ignore like overall results and how it's gone this year, they have proven the concept. The proof of concept has been established that German Counter-Strike can work. They even, what's brilliant is, they're one of the most extreme examples historically of how like cultural norms fit into the game and the personality of the team. The team is a tactical team. The team is a machine that works in the way that all those stereotypes of like German football and the way Germany, the country in theories, I mean, that part's a bit washed if you've ever been there. The trains definitely don't all run fucking perfectly on time, and it isn't really simple and like a computer. But that one's just always been a bit of a meme. Like in general, obviously they do value efficiency and the overall structure. Like that actually plays out in the game. I actually think Big is a mad underrated team, because the problem is, because of the firepower's not that great, because they stuck with German players, I'm never going to pick them to win the really big matches, because I'm sorry, star players win the big matches. That's just how Counter-Strike and every sport works, I'm afraid. But if you want to look at a team that I have bet on loads of times when they're an underdog, it is Big, because they're the team where if you give me like 2.5 or 3 odds and they're playing not the best team, they're playing like an NIP or a heroic, mate, I'll take them all day long, because that's the other thing about this squad. They showed it in this RMR. This lineup had no business qualifying, in my opinion. They almost beat Ents even. Like, they had no business winning that game. But you watch how they play and their system and their approach, which it clearly does come from the lineage of God B. He's even the coach again now, into tabseN. tabseN sort of got a similar calling style. They are like way better than you'd think. Like the eye test on this team checks out way better than the stats, way better than the lineup, way better than even the placings. Like even on paper, they're another team, by the way, a bit like Outsiders, where everyone goes, oh, the map veto's obvious. Those two teams, like, it might be obvious what they'll pick. It's not obvious which map they'll win and lose. Like, these guys win on the maps they have, like, the 33% win rate on, like, an absurd amount of times that they shouldn't happen. Like, they're just the ones who, like, their approach to the game, because I've picked two incredibly stylistic teams there, it just works. Like, you can tell these IGLs really know what they're doing with their pieces. So I just think it's sad in general, because basically, like you say, this year could have been so different for them, and it would have been so much more meaningful than when they were just a generalized international team with like Xantares plus like a bunch of like good players.
Mm-hmm. I would want to say, like, I think it's, again, like going back to like what I said in the beginning about the academy teams, I'm happy that they finally actually got themselves like, an academy team. So first of all, they will stop buying players from Sprout. I guess like they were so done with this that they even went international. They're like, there's no point of us even trying, because even if we find someone, you will take them away. So like now, Big were like, okay, I guess we need like an academy team. So they got themselves an academy team, and tabseN, like he actually spends some time helping them out, which is great, because not only the guys get experience like from like an amazing and like the best IGL in Germany, but also it kind of sets them in the right direction. So like whenever they will pick like one of the players into the team, they're already kind of ready. It's not like they're rewriting the player from zero. He will be like, okay, I remember like what tabseN told us. This is how like we were playing like in our academy team. So it will be easier for him and for them to actually adapt into the team.
Right. For my the last point of the show, my ugly point, actually ties into this exact one. I'm glad you actually brought it up. I always think we didn't coordinate on this, but I was already thinking of it when I was trying to spitball what my last take would be. It's going to be a take that I saw. Look, this parallel thinking exists. I didn't invent the take in the first place. It does look bad if you go and check that. Like, it does seem like he did say it like right after I said it, and then everyone's complaining for him. But when Pimp did that take of like tabseN's wasted, but like I almost said it word for word, like that like tabseN has absolutely wasted his best years in big. Now the reason why that is my ugly point, notice I've crucially picked it there, not a bad point, is because, look, he can do his own career his way. And if he chooses, by the way, that we wouldn't have said all that stuff we just said about Big if tabseN didn't choose to play for them. I've always said he's one of those people, a bit like when Alu went back to Finland and played in Ents those years, sometimes in the bad years with Ents, and then eventually with the lineup that eventually got good, but those weren't top players when he joined. That's an example of where Alu was wasting his best years. Like, he could always have been in FaZe Clan or like a top 10 team or one of the international squads. Like, he could always have been in better squads and would have had, in theory, a better career, right? But the reason why Big was able to get so good is because they had an overqualified star player, not only stay in their team and frag out when God B was there, then become the IGL while still having to frag and be a really good IGL and train up rookies. Like, mate, the amount of things he's done, like, for Big, it's awesome. The problem is, I do think for his career, it doesn't matter. When he retires, he will never be remembered as good as he was, tabseN, as a player. And I even think now, even as an IGL, like the IGL part's the killer. Because he already could have been a literal FaZe Clan player as an individual player. He was a really strong rifler. But as an IGL, dude, teams like that were desperate for a player like that who can IGL a top team and knows what star players want. Like, he would have been so sought after as a player. Teams like the G2's of the world, FaZe Clans of the world, these would be the squads that would want this guy. And so as a result, he could have won majors. He could have won Grand Slams. He could have won Tier 1 tournaments. He could have been a top 10 player in the world, top 20 player in the world, depending on which role he was playing. But I actually do think when people look back on his career, they're going to do what everyone does once you're the person 10 years from now who didn't watch the game. You're going to go to a Wikipedia, you're going to look at the results, and you're going to go, he was in some pretty good teams, but I guess he wasn't that great. Or you're even going to think, and this will be totally wrong, you're going to think, I guess he was never good enough then, because why didn't he get called up to G2 when they went international? Why didn't Vitality come knocking on his door? Why wasn't he in FaZe Clan if he was so good? In fact, you know what? He wasn't even in bloody Ents. He wasn't even in these other teams that went international. Whereas the problem with that is you will actually be wrong. This is a rare example of someone choosing to limit their career options to accomplish a different goal than like traditional success. He's obviously trying to, like, you don't know, there's another angle to this that people might not know, which is actually one of the few orgs I might actually give the status, Maui, of they behave like a family is Big. The whole thing with tabseN and God B that was explained to me years ago was like, don't worry, they'll never be leaving and going to top teams. It doesn't matter who comes calling, because the whole thing is they like actually do believe in what the owner of them are literally friends. I think they have like dinner together and stuff with the fucking teams, and they actually have like a whole vibe of like, it's not just a ruthless team of like cutting people. It's why if you notice, they don't even just instantly cut people. They give you months and months and months extra if you keto. They give you months and months extra if you're Tizian. You can underperform. They don't just go, right, get him out of there. It's not like there's no German players. They just give you a real chance. Whether that's what you would do if you were family, you would give the guy an extra break, or you'd know what's going on in his personal life, and you wouldn't go, well, I don't care about it. Let's be professional. You'd be like, no, well, obviously, I do care, actually. So we have to support this guy as much as we're a team as well. So to me, I actually think he could have been so much greater a player. So to me, it's just ugly because obviously if I could, like, football manager style, put him in teams, we could have made so many interesting lineups. He could have had so many amazing time periods. And it isn't even that thing as well, by the way, where people are going to think like, it's just that he looked good on a bad team. It's like, mate, he looked the best on a team that was like pretty good or good, like consistently for like what, like fucking at this point in time, like 4 years or something mental. Yeah, it's ridiculous. Yeah. And I also think he's another player, by the way. Stats will never tell you the truth. I don't give a fuck, Mauisnake, how like his rating looks on HLTV. Go and watch actual games with the eye test of how he is playing. He is still a really good fragger for an IGL. He is mad overqualified.
And he might be, other than maybe electronic, when I think tabseN's top 3 fragging IGL pretty easily right now. And for him, and where I would kind of disagree, where like, yeah, well, maybe us as fans and people like the pundits of the game are gonna look back and be like, he could have done so much more. What he's gonna get from all of this is seeing, hopefully, the fruits of his labor are the German scene continue on to be what he wants it to be. Like, this is his baby. This is him saying that I want to make sure that people in my country are consistently playing at a high level in the way that you're supposed to play, and he's giving his life essentially and the best years of his life to make sure that this continues moving forward. So if he's able to accomplish that, I think he'll find deep satisfaction in that, in a way that a #1 trophy or like a top 10 HLTV ranking would never have gave him. So this is to me like I think he's chosen his path in life, and I think he's very confident and comfortable with it.
Yeah, I guess it also kind of in a way it's kind of inspirational, like for like upcoming players when they see like this amazing player that has like a potential to play international, maybe get like those big trophies. He actually stays, so it's like then this way you'll not have like a bunch of talent just like running away, saying like, yeah, I'll play in the German team, but look, this guy that has been playing for many years, he also ran away because it's impossible to achieve anything here. Yes, they are having problems getting those titles that probably they deserve, but it does give this like inspiration to the whole scene, to like the upcoming guys who are looking at them and trying to replicate whatever they're doing.